The thing that hunts you in the dark is not a stranger. By the reckoning of one very old book, it is a ghost with a bloodline. It is the spirit of a giant who drowned in the flood, and it is still here, still walking the earth you walk, because after the water went down, an angel and the accuser of mankind stood over the corpse of the world and made a bargain. 9 parts of those spirits were dragged below. 1 part in 10 was allowed to stay, to touch you, to sicken you, to wait at the edge of your worst decisions and push. And the medicine to survive them, the herbs and the words and the order of the cure, was dictated leaf by leaf to a grieving old man on a mountain of mud by an angel who had watched him lose everything and could not bear to leave him defenseless. None of that is in the Bible on your shelf. All of it is in a book that was left out. A book that claims to be older and stranger and more exact than the Genesis you were raised on. A book that says it was handed to Moses on the top of Mount Sinai during the 40 days and 40 nights he vanished into the cloud, and that it was not spoken by God directly, but read aloud to him from heavenly tablets by a second voice standing at his shoulder. The text has a name for that voice. It calls him the Angel of the Presence. And the book has a name too. For 2,000 years it has been called the Book of Jubilees, because it does something no other scripture dares to do. It puts a clock on everything. It takes the whole history of the world, from the first morning of creation down to the mountain where Moses is kneeling, and it measures it, not in vague begats and long-lived patriarchs, but in exact units of 49 years, ticking one after another like the teeth of a gear. And hidden inside that clock, if you are patient enough to count, is a countdown, a date that keeps coming back, a single day on the calendar that the world was destroyed on and was almost saved on and will, the book quietly promises, matter one final time. So stay with me, because before this is over, I am going to show you all of it. I am going to show you the secret calendar the book says was written into the sun on the 4th day of creation, and why getting it wrong is the reason the ancient authors believed the whole world had gone blind. I am going to show you the 7 years that Adam and Eve actually spent in the garden, and the precise date the world went wrong, down to the month and the day. I am going to show you the first murder, and the strange mathematical way the first murderer died, crushed by the very thing he had used to kill. I am going to show you the 200 angels coming down in the days of a man named Descent, and the boy born white as snow, whose father was afraid he was not human. And at the very end, I am going to show you the number, the Checksum, the date that opens the whole story like a key turning in a lock, the same date the world drowned on, hidden in plain sight since the first week of the world. Do not leave before the number. Everything else is only the walk toward it. And before you decide this is only a story someone invented late and slipped in through a side door, look at how hard the world once tried to keep it. The Book of Jubilees survived whole in just one language, the old Ethiopic tongue called Ge'ez, carried for century after century as holy scripture by the church in Ethiopia, while the rest of the world let it fall out of memory. And then in the caves above the Dead Sea, among the scrolls that the people of Qumran hid from the armies of Rome, it turned up again, this time in its original Hebrew, in more copies than almost any book that did make it into your Bible. Those people, sealing their library into clay jars in the desert, did not treat this book as a curiosity. They treated it as scripture. They read it beside Genesis. They may even have read it above Genesis. Honesty requires me to say what is disputed, and here it is. The scholars still argue about exactly when Jubilees was written, and by whom, and most place it a couple of centuries before the time of Christ. That much is genuinely uncertain, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But what is not in serious doubt is that the book is old enough to have been ancient when the Gospels were young, and old enough that the writers of the New Testament breathed the same air it did. It was not left out of the Western Bible because nobody had heard of it. It was quoted, echoed, and known. It was left out, if the pattern of these books means anything, because it said too much, and said it too precisely. And it has been whispering the same strange, exact story the entire time, waiting for someone to sit still long enough to count. But to understand any of it, you have to go back up the mountain, into the cloud, and stand where Moses is standing. The text opens in the 3rd month after the people came out of Egypt, on the mountain, in the fire. For 6 days a cloud covers the summit, and on the 7th day the Lord calls Moses up into the middle of it. Stand in that scene for a moment before the writing begins, because the book has set it with care. A mountain wrapped in cloud for 6 days, the whole camp below craning up at a smoking summit, and on the 7th day a single voice out of the heart of the fire, calling one man up into it. To the people at the bottom, the glory on the peak looked like a devouring flame. And into that furnace of light walks Moses, and stays 40 days and 40 nights, eating nothing, while below him a nervous, newly freed nation waits. And though he does not know it yet, has already begun to forget. That is the setting for the longest dictation in Scripture. Not a quiet study with a lamp, the top of a burning mountain, one man alone inside the fire, and a voice beginning, patiently, at the very beginning of the world. And there the ordinary story, the one you know, splits in two. In the version you were taught, Moses receives the law, the commandments, the rules of the tabernacle, and comes back down. But this book says something else was happening in those 40 days. It says the Lord turned to the angel at his side and gave a single, staggering instruction. Write for Moses, he says, from the beginning of creation until the day my sanctuary is built among them forever. Write all of it, the history nobody remembers, the divisions of the days, the order that has been forgotten, and the angel begins to write. And what he writes is a second Genesis, told from the inside, told by someone who says he was there. And before the history even begins, the frame gives you its stakes, and they are heavier than you might think, because the Lord does not simply tell Moses to write, he tells him why. He tells him up there in the fire that his own people are going to forget all of this. They will go astray, he says, as to new moons and Sabbaths and festivals and jubilees. They will lose the count. They will chase after strange gods and forget the order of the days, and for that forgetting, they will be scattered among the nations, hunted, taken captive, torn out of their land. And then, after all of it, when they finally turn back and seek him with their whole heart, he will gather them again and heal them. The whole book, every date and every generation, and every jubilee is written against that forgetting. It is a message sealed in a bottle and thrown forward across the centuries by a God who already knows his people will drop the thread, laid down now so that when they finally reach for it again, the thread will still be there, coiled and waiting, exactly where the angel left it. That is what you are actually reading, not a history for its own sake, a rescue written in advance. Listen to how he begins, because the first thing he tells Moses is not about man at all. On the first day, he says, "The Lord created the heavens and the earth and the waters, and every spirit that serves before him. The angels of the presence, the angels of sanctification, the angels of the fire and the wind and the cloud, of the frost and the thunder and the deep. On the first day, 7 great works, and the angel remembers standing there among the others, freshly made, watching the light come on. We saw his works," he says, "and we praised him." You are not being told this history by a scribe reading an old scroll. You are being told it by a witness who was in the room. And on the 4th day, the angel writes, "When the sun and the moon and the stars were set burning in the sky, God did not only hang them there for light. He appointed the sun to be a great sign upon the earth, a sign for days and for weeks, and for months and for feasts and for years, and for the sevens of years, and for the 50-year jubilees, and for every season that would ever turn." Read that again slowly, because this is the hinge the entire book swings on. On the 4th day of creation, before there was a single human eye to read it, the calendar was already written, not on stone, on the sky. And the sun, the book insists, keeps perfect time, 364 days to the year, 52 weeks exactly, not 1 hour more, so that every feast falls on the same day of the week forever, and the pattern never slips. Now hold that number in your hand, 364, because the book will come back to it in a fury. It will accuse the whole world of losing count. It will say that anyone who watches the moon instead of the sun, anyone who lets the year drift 10 days too soon, has torn the holy days loose from their moorings, and will keep the feast of God on the wrong day, an unclean day mistaken for a sacred one, a sacred day thrown out as common. Picture a whole nation kneeling on the wrong afternoon, certain to a soul that they are on time, and heaven silent above them because the appointment was yesterday. To the author, that is not a small mistake in bookkeeping. That is the lights going out one by one across the world. And here is the thing that turns a dry quarrel about calendars into something with a pulse. The author does not write as though this is a danger waiting somewhere in the future. He writes as a man convinced it has already happened. He believes the world around him has lost the count, is keeping its holy days on the wrong afternoons, is living 10 days out of step with heaven and does not even know it, like a great choir singing confidently in the wrong key. That is the grief buried under all his counting. He is not simply recording the calendar for tidiness. He is trying to hand it back to a world he is certain has already dropped it. Every date he pins down so fiercely is a man standing in the street shouting the correct time at a city full of stopped clocks and being taken for a lunatic, and shouting anyway. To the author, this is not a footnote about arithmetic. This is the original sin of the calendar. It is how you lose the thread of time itself, and by the end of the book you will understand why a man counting years so carefully, so obsessively, was doing it for one reason above all others. Because if you know the exact length of a year, and you know the exact age of every man in the line, then you can do something terrifying. You can count forward to the end. And there is one more idea you need in your hand before the story truly starts to move, because it runs underneath everything else, like a current beneath ice. Again and again, Jubilees will stop and tell you that a thing is written on the heavenly tablets, not written down afterward by a scribe on earth, written above, beforehand. The book imagines a set of tablets in heaven, on which the real shape of everything is already inscribed. Every law, every feast, every judgment, every death, cut into the stone of heaven before it ever happens in the dust below. Earth in this vision is not the place where the story gets decided. Earth is the stage where a story already written upstairs gets performed. When Cain lifts his stone, the verdict is already on the tablets. When the calendar turns, it is only reading off the tablets. When a man dies on the exact day he was warned about, 1,000 years later, it is because that day was carved into the tablets before he drew his first breath. And this is either the most comforting idea you have ever heard, or the most frightening one, depending entirely on the hour of the night you hear it. The book knows that, and it refuses to soften it. It simply tells you, over and over, that the ledger is already full, that the ink is already dry. You are not writing the story of the world. You are catching up to it. Before the garden, though, the angel lingers over the making of the world, and the details he chooses to dwell on are not the ones you would expect. He does not marvel at the light or the oceans. He counts. On the first day, he says, 7 great works, and he lists them like an inventory clerk. The heavens, the earth, the waters, the deeps, the darkness, the light, and the dawn. And folded in among them, before there was a single tree, all the spirits that serve before God, rank after rank of them. On the second day, one work, the firmament dividing the waters above from the waters below. On the third day, the dry land and the seas and the rivers and the seed and the Garden of Eden itself, already planted, waiting. On the fourth day, the sun and the moon and the stars, set burning as signs. On the fifth day, the great sea creatures and the birds. And on the sixth day, the animals of the earth. And then last of all, almost as an afterthought in the angel's telling, man, a man and a woman made together, given dominion over all of it. And then the angel does the arithmetic, because of course he does. 2 and 20 kinds of work, he says, were made in the 6 days of creation, 2 and 20. And then he tells you something that should stop you cold, a piece of hidden symmetry that only a mind obsessed with counting would ever have noticed. There were, he says, 2 and 20 heads of mankind from Adam down to Jacob, 22 works of creation, 22 generations to the father of Israel. The number of things God made in the beginning is the exact number of men it took to reach the chosen line. The book is telling you that the genealogy is not a list. It is a second creation running in parallel to the first, the same shape stamped twice, once on the cosmos and once on the family. And the seventh day, the Sabbath, the day God rested and hallowed, becomes the sign over both of them, a rhythm of sevens that the whole book will beat like a drum, 7 days in a week, 7 years in a week of years, 7 weeks of years in a jubilee. Everything in this book is built out of sevens, and it wants you to feel the pattern the way you feel a heartbeat, because a pattern that regular is the opposite of chance. A pattern that regular is a design, and a design has a designer, and a designer has an ending in mind. And on the sixth day, when the animals were made, something happened that Genesis rushes past and Jubilees slows down to savor. God brought every beast and bird and creeping thing to the man over 5 days, kind by kind, and Adam named them every one. And as he called each creature, so its name became, fixed forever by the first human voice. Picture the patience of that, a single man standing at the head of all creation as it files past him, giving each thing its word. And the book adds the lonely detail underneath it. Through all of it, through every animal that passed him 2 by 2, male and female, according to its kind, the man himself was alone, and found no helpmeet for himself. He named the whole world in pairs, and stood in the middle of it single. And so God caused the deep sleep to fall on him, and took the rib and built the woman, and woke him, and brought her to him. And Adam said the first poetry ever spoken, "This is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh." In the first week, the book says, Adam was made. In the second week, the woman was shown to him. Even Eden runs on the calendar. But first, the garden. And here the book does something Genesis never does. It tells you the dates. You have always been told, vaguely, that Adam and Eve were in Eden, and then they fell, and it feels like it all happened in an afternoon. The Book of Jubilees says no. It says Adam was formed outside, in the land of his making, and only after 40 days was he brought into the garden to tend it. His wife was not brought in with him. She came on the 80th day, twice as long, and the book pauses here to say that this is why, in the law Moses is receiving, a woman is kept apart twice as long after bearing a daughter as after bearing a son. The garden, in this telling, is not just a paradise. It is the first temple, holier than all the earth, and every rule that would ever govern the sanctuary was rehearsed there first. And then the sentence that changes everything. In the first week of the first Jubilee, the book says, Adam and his wife were in the Garden of Eden for 7 years. 7 years. Tilling it, keeping it, guarding it from the beasts, gathering its fruit, setting aside the residue. 7 full years of a naked, unhurried peace, a marriage with no shame in it and no clock on it, in the holiest ground that ever existed. Whatever you pictured, it was longer than that. Long enough to feel permanent. Long enough that they must have believed it would never end. Picture what those 7 years were actually like, because the book leaves you just enough to build them. A man and a woman with real work in their hands, tilling ground that had never grown a weed, guarding the trees from the birds and the beasts and the cattle, gathering the fruit in the evening and setting aside what they could not eat. No hunger that could not be answered. No word for shame, because there was never once an occasion to learn it. And over all of it, the strange weight of the place, ground the book calls holier than all the earth. Every single tree in it counted as holy, as though the two of them were not gardeners at all, but the first 2 priests, keeping the first sanctuary, rehearsing a liturgy they did not yet know they were performing. 7 years is long enough to stop counting the days, long enough to forget that anything is being measured at all, which is precisely when the measuring matters most. And then the book counts down to the exact moment it did. After the completion of the 7 years, it says, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, the serpent came and approached the woman. Mark that date. The 2nd month, the 17th day, not a season, not a vague morning, a day you could circle on a calendar. The book has just told you, with the flat precision of a coroner, the date the world went wrong. And you already know the scene that follows, but listen to how old and cold it sounds in this telling. The serpent asks its question. The woman answers, Ye shall not surely die, it says. For God doth know that on the day ye eat thereof, your eyes will be opened, and ye will be as gods. And she looks at the tree, and it is pleasant to the eye, and she takes, and she eats, and she covers her shame with fig leaves before she ever hands the fruit to her husband, and his eyes open too. And here the book lets the oldest lie in the world just sit there, uncorrected, so that you can see the exact shape of it. Ye shall be as gods, the serpent had said, knowing good and evil. And that is the hook, because it was almost true, and almost true is how the very best lies work. They were already like God. The angel has just finished telling you that man was made in the image of God and given dominion over everything that moves upon the earth. They already wore the crown. The whole trick of the serpent was to convince them that the thing they already were was a thing they still had to steal, that their birthright was a locked door, that they were standing on the outside of a house they already owned, and so they reached for what was already in their hands, and in the reaching they let it fall. That is the anatomy of the first sin in this book. Not a hunger for something they lacked, a failure to believe they already had it, and God comes, and the curse falls, and the last words spoken over Adam are the ones that will govern every human being who ever draws breath. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life, thorns and thistles, bread in the sweat of thy face, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. And then Jubilees adds a detail that Genesis leaves silent, and it is the kind of detail that makes the hair stand up, because it is so specific and so sad. On that day, the book says, on the day Adam went out from the garden, the mouth of every beast was closed. Until that morning, it says, all the animals had spoken, one lip, one tongue, one language shared between man and creature. And when the gate shut behind Adam, the beasts fell silent, all of them, forever. The lion could no longer answer, the birds could no longer explain. Whatever conversation the world had been having since the first week ended in a single afternoon, and it has never started again. Read that, and then listen to the animals you can hear right now, and understand that the book is telling you they are not mute, they are grieving, and there is one more mercy folded into the same moment, with a horror hidden inside it. Because before he sent them out, the book says, God made for Adam and his wife coats of skin, and clothed them. Read that plainly, and it takes the breath out of you. To cover the shame of the two people who had just let death into the world, something had to die. An animal, one of the creatures Adam had named in the garden with his own mouth, was killed, so that its skin could cover them. The first death in the history of the world, in this telling, is not the punishment of a guilty thing. It is a covering for a guilty thing. It is God taking one of his own creatures and putting it to death to clothe the children who had just doomed the whole of creation, and then sending them out of the gate wearing the evidence. They walked down into the fallen world, dressed in the very first thing that ever died in their place. And Jubilees records one more thing about that last morning, a small and human gesture in the middle of the catastrophe. As Adam went out, the book says, he stopped and made an offering. A sweet smoke of frankincense and galbanum and stacta and fragrant spices burned in the morning at the rising of the sun. Sit with that image, because it is the first act of worship in the history of the world, and it is not a song of thanksgiving, and it is not a feast. It is a man standing at the gate he has just been thrown out of, lighting incense at dawn, trying to send something back over the wall to a place he will never be allowed to enter again. And on the new moon of the 4th month, Adam and his wife walked out of the garden and down into the ordinary land, the land of Elda, the land of their creation, and the sword of fire turned behind them to keep the way. And Adam named his wife Eve. And for the first time in the history of the world, two people stood under an open sky with nothing over them but weather and the memory of a gate. They did not have a child in the garden, not one in 7 years. The book is careful about that. The children come after, out here, in the dust, under the curse. And they come in numbers. Jubilees will tell you, almost in passing, that beyond the famous few, the ones whose names you know, Adam knew his wife, and she bore him 9 more sons, and daughters besides, so that the empty world begins quietly to fill. Picture it, 2 people who remember paradise, growing old in a hard country, surrounded by a swelling crowd of children who have never seen a garden and never will, who know Eden only as a story their parents tell, with a particular look on their faces. The whole human race, in this book, begins as the homesick children of exiles, and that is where the counting truly begins, because now every birth is a tick of the clock, and the clock, remember, is running towards something. The first child born to them is a son, and the second child born to them is a son. And one of those 2 boys is going to lift his hand against the other in a field, and the ground itself is going to open its mouth to drink. And the strangest part, the part the old book records with the calm of a mathematician balancing a ledger, is not the murder, it is the way the murderer dies, because the same stone he uses in that field is waiting for him patiently for hundreds of years, and when it finally comes for him, it will not miss. And the date the world went wrong, the 2nd month, and the 17th day, the one I told you to mark, is not finished with this story. It is going to come back, and the next time it comes back, it will not be one man leaving a garden. It will be the whole world going under the water. So watch the field, because the first 2 brothers are standing in it. The book has already told you the dates of their births with that same unnerving precision. Cain in 1 week of years, Abel in the next, and a sister born after. And then, in the first year of the 3rd Jubilee, the sentence that the whole world still lives inside. Cain slew Abel, because the Lord accepted the sacrifice of Abel and did not accept the offering of Cain. He slew him in the field, and his blood cried from the ground to heaven. You know the story. But before the book turns that murder into law, it stops and lets you feel what it cost the 2 people who had already lost a garden. Adam and his wife, Jubilees says, mourned for Abel 4 weeks of years. Stop and count that the way the author wants you to. 4 weeks of years is 28 years. Not 28 days of black cloth and then back to the fields. 28 years of grief over one grave by 2 people who had now watched death walk into the world twice. Once as a sentence handed down at a gate, and once as the hand of one son closing around the throat of the other. For 28 years, the first family on earth simply grieved. And only after that, the book says, did they turn to each other again, and a new son came, and they called him Seth, a name that means set or placed, a seed set down into the exact hole where Abel had been torn out. That is the channel this book runs in. It gives you the number, and then it makes the number hurt. And then, having made you feel it, Jubilees does something with the murder that Genesis never bothers to do. It writes the verdict into law, and then it lets the law come back around. Because listen to what the book says is engraved on the heavenly tablets after Cain is cursed. With the instrument with which a man kills his neighbor, with the same shall he be killed. After the manner that he wounded him, in like manner shall they deal with him. That is not a proverb. In this book it is a physical law of the universe, as fixed as gravity, and it has just been switched on over the head of the first murderer. Cain used a stone. And the book, hundreds of years of story later, is going to collect, but not yet. First, Cain does something almost stranger than the murder. He builds a city. The man cursed to be a fugitive and a wanderer, the man told he would never again settle, plants himself down and raises walls, and he names the city after his son Enoch, which in the tongue of the book means dedication, a beginning. Think about what that is. The first city on earth is founded by the first murderer, as an act of defiance against a sentence of exile. It is the whole ache of human civilization compressed into a single decision. We were told to wander, and we built a wall instead. Everything that comes after, every tower, every kingdom, every locked door, is in some sense the City of Cain, the refusal to keep moving. And notice that the book has already told you how that refusal ends. The city Cain builds will not save him. It will kill him, its own stones coming down on his own head, and we will get to exactly how. The first act of civilization and the instrument of the first murderer's death turn out to be the same walls. Jubilees is not against cities the way a hermit is against them. It is telling you something colder and truer than that. It is telling you that everything we build to escape our sentence is built out of the same material as the sentence, that the wall raised to keep the wilderness out is also the wall that can fall inward and bury you, and that stone remembers what it was first lifted to do. Hold that thought, because a whole drowned world is about to prove it on the largest scale imaginable. And around that city, the clock keeps ticking, and this is where you have to start counting with the book, because it will not let you look away from the numbers. Seth is born. Then Enos, and the book says that in his days men began to call on the name of the Lord, the first public worship, the first congregations gathering under the open sky. Sit with that for a moment, because it is easy to let it slide past. There was a first time, a first gathering of human beings who lifted their faces together and called on a name at once. Before Enos, the book seems to say, worship was a solitary thing, a man and an altar and the smoke of his own guilt, the way Adam had burned incense alone at the shut gate. In the days of Enos, it became a congregation, a crowd, the first time the scattered children of the exiles all turned toward the same thing at the same moment. and spoke to it in one voice. The first church in the history of the world, in a field, under the stars, whole generations before there would be a temple, or a law, or a nation to house it. Then Kenan, then Mahalalel. Each name a link, each birth measured to the exact week of the exact year of the exact jubilee, the gear turning one more tooth. It reads like a genealogy, the kind of passage your eye slides over. Do not let your eye slide. The author is not padding. He is building a clock, and he is winding it toward a specific hour, and every one of these forgettable names is a number he needs you to have. And the book is franker than Genesis about how that early world actually filled. It names the wives. It tells you without a flicker of embarrassment that in those first generations the sons married their own sisters and their cousins, the daughters of their father's brothers, because in a world descended from a single pair, there was simply no one else on the earth to marry. It states this the way it states everything, flatly, as a fact for the record, because the author is not writing to comfort you. He is writing to account for you. Every one of us, the genealogy quietly insists, comes down through that narrow, tangled channel, a handful of families in a nearly empty world, marrying close because there was nothing else. Each union another line in the ledger, another set of dates, another tooth on the gear. It is not romance. It is arithmetic with names on it, and it is still winding, patiently, toward the hour the author has already fixed in his mind. And then the clock reaches a man whose name is a warning. In the second week of the 10th Jubilee, the book says, a son was born, and they called his name Jared. And Jubilees pauses, the way it only pauses for things that matter, to tell you why. He was called Jared, it says, for in his days the angels of the Lord descended on the earth. Descended, that is what the name means, Jared, the descent. This child was named after a thing that had not happened yet, a thing his parents somehow knew was coming, as though the whole family could feel the sky getting lower. And here the Book of Jubilees tells the story you have heard before. The 200 angels, the watchers, coming down onto the mountaintops of the ancient world. But it tells it with a twist that will make your skin crawl, because it does not begin with a crime. It begins with a mission. The watchers, Jubilees says, came down in the days of Jared to instruct the children of men, to teach them to do judgment and uprightness upon the earth. They were sent. That is the horror of it in this telling. The beings who would go on to father the giants and break the world did not sneak in. They came as teachers. They came, at first, to help. Picture the descent itself, the way the older books remember it. 200 of them, coming down out of the sky onto the high places of the earth, onto the bare cold summits above the tree line, because a mountaintop is the nearest thing the ground has to heaven. And there on the peak, the tradition says, they bound themselves together with an oath, each one swearing that the others would not turn back, so that no single one of them could ever be blamed alone. If that image is pulling at something in you, it should, because it is the beginning of a story this channel has already walked in full, on another mountain, with the same 200 and the same terrible, unbreakable vow. Jubilees hands you the aftermath of that oath. It tells you what the teachers curdled into. But the descent itself, the circle of them standing on the summit, the promise none of them could take back, is the door standing open right beside this one. If you have not gone through it yet, it is waiting for you. And somewhere in the teaching, somewhere between the knowledge they were meant to bring and the daughters of men they were not meant to touch, the mission curdled, and the helpers became the infection. Hold that, because it is the pattern of every good thing that has ever gone wrong. Nothing starts as the monster. The monster is what the teacher becomes when it forgets what it came down for. And what did they teach? Jubilees keeps its voice low here, but its older companion, the Book of Enoch, does not. And where the two texts touch, you can feel how old the memory underneath them is. They taught the working of metal, the beating of ore into blades and into armor, and so the earth, which had known murder by a single stone, learned war by the ton. They taught the cutting of roots and the powers hidden in plants, the sorceries that bend the world sideways. They taught the women the arts of ornament, the paints for the eyes, and the working of precious stones. And they taught the men to read the stars for omens. until knowledge itself became a kind of contagion. Every gift, a door shoved open a little too far. Honesty requires me to say that Jubilees itself is sparing with the list and leans toward the gentler word, instruct, while it is Enoch that names the crimes one by one. So take the details as the older tradition remembered them, not as settled fact. But the two books agree completely on the shape of the thing. The catastrophe was not that the angels came down ignorant. The catastrophe was everything they knew. They poured heaven's knowledge into a world with no banks to hold it. And the knowledge did what a flood does to a flat field. It spread, and it drowned, and it left nothing standing. And into that darkening world, into the generation of the descent, the book drops the one man it clearly loves the most. Because in the very same stretch where the angels are coming down to ruin, a boy is born to Jared, and they call his name Enoch. And Jubilees says something about this Enoch that it says about no one else in the entire history of the world. He was the first, it says, the first among all men that are born on earth who learnt writing and knowledge and wisdom, the first scribe, the first human being ever to take the chaos of what he saw and freeze it into marks on a page. And what does the first writer in history choose to write? Not a poem, not a king list. He writes down the sky. He wrote the signs of the heaven, the book says, according to the order of their months, so that men might know the seasons of the years. Do you see what the author has done? He has made the inventor of writing and the keeper of the calendar the same man. The first person to write and the first person to count time correctly are one. Enoch is the human answer to the sun. Heaven wrote the calendar into the fourth day, and Enoch is the first man to read it back. And then the book says, Enoch was taken. But watch where. In the older story you may know, Enoch is taken up into the heavens through the palaces of fire. Jubilees agrees he was taken, but it lands him somewhere very specific and very haunting. They conducted him, it says, into the Garden of Eden in majesty and honor. Back into the garden, back through the gate that shut behind Adam, the gate the sword of fire had been turning to guard. The first man was thrown out of Eden for reaching after forbidden knowledge. And now a man who used knowledge rightly, who read the heavens and testified against the angels who had abused them, is walked back in and set there like a monument. And there, the book says, he writes. He sits in the garden at the source of the world, and he writes down the condemnation and the judgment of all the children of men, and he burns incense of the sanctuary, sweet spices, before the Lord. Adam left Eden lighting incense at the gate from the outside. Enoch is brought back inside to burn it at the altar. The book is drawing a line between two men across 1,000 years, and the line is made of smoke. And while Enoch sits writing in the garden, the book pauses to tell you something about the geography of holiness that it has been quietly assembling all along. There are, it says, 4 places on the earth that belong to the Lord. The Garden of Eden, where Enoch now sits with his pen. The Mount of the East, Mount Sinai, the very mountain where Moses is kneeling in the cloud as he receives all of this. And Mount Zion, which will be made holy in the new creation at the end of everything. 4 sacred summits, 4 fixed points, and the book has just pinned Enoch to one of them, and Moses to another, drawing a taut line between the man who first wrote the calendar down and the man now receiving it, straight across the whole length of the story. The lost books are full of these hidden geometries, mountains and dates and names that rhyme across the centuries. And the author wants you to feel that the map of the world has a grain running through it, that certain places are load-bearing, that holiness, in this telling, has an address you could walk to. And Jubilees is careful to tell you how Enoch earned that seat, because it is not a reward for being holy in some vague, gentle way. He was with the angels of God, the book says, for 6 Jubilees of years. 6 Jubilees. Nearly 300 years walking with the messengers of heaven while they showed him everything. The rule of the sun, the order of the months, the machinery of the sky, turning behind the weather, and he wrote all of it down. And then he did the dangerous thing. He testified against the watchers. The same angels who had come down in the days of his grandfather to teach, and had stayed to defile themselves with the daughters of men, Enoch stood up and named. He was the witness for the prosecution against beings that could have unmade him. The first man ever to write became the first man ever to tell the truth about the powers of the air in permanent ink, where it could not be argued away. That is why he is walked back into the garden. Not because he was quiet and good, because he kept the record straight when the whole world was going crooked. And the book says he did more than witness. He saw what was and what will be. It says, Enoch saw in a vision of his sleep everything that would happen to the children of men throughout their generations, all the way down to the day of judgment, and he wrote it down and set the writing on the earth as a testimony. Sit with the loneliness of that for a moment. The first human being who could write is handed a vision of the entire future, of every generation that will ever rise and fall, including yours, including this exact moment you are living in right now, and he is made to carry it alone, in ink, among people who cannot yet read a single mark. He was a library before there were readers, a warning laid down for descendants who would not arrive for thousands of years, and perhaps that is the deeper reason the book loves him past all the others, because Enoch is the first person who ever wrote for the future instead of for the present, which is precisely what the author of Jubilees believes he himself is doing, up on the mountain, taking down the whole history of the world for people not yet born. And while Enoch is being honored, the oldest thing in the world is quietly dying, because the book now tells you that Adam died. He lived 930 years, and the book stops to do arithmetic over his grave. And the arithmetic is a knife. He lacked 70 years, it says, of 1,000 years. And then this, for 1,000 years are as one day in the testimony of heaven, and therefore was it written concerning the tree of knowledge, on the day that ye eat thereof, ye shall die. Read that slowly. God had said in the garden, in the day you eat of it, you shall die. And Adam ate and did not drop dead that afternoon. And skeptics have poked at that gap for as long as there have been skeptics. Jubilees closes the gap with a single chilling equation. A day in heaven's reckoning is 1,000 years. Adam died at 930. He died inside the day. He fell 70 years short of the deadline. And so he died, the book says, on the very day he was warned about, exactly as promised, just measured on heaven's clock instead of yours. And they buried him. All his sons gathered and put the first man into the ground. And the book notes with that same strange tenderness it hides inside its arithmetic, that he was the first to be buried in the earth. Think about what that sentence contains. The ground that had been cursed for his sake, the dust he had been told to his face he would return to, opens for the very first time to receive a human body, and the body it receives is his. The sentence spoken over him at the gate, "Unto dust shalt thou return," was never a metaphor. It was an appointment, like everything else in this book. And now it has been kept, and the earth has closed over the man it was shaped to feed. The first grave in the history of the world holds the first man, dug by the children of his exile in the land where he was made. Sit with that, because it is the first time in this story that you see the author's real obsession working at full power. He is telling you that the promises of God are not vague, they are appointments, and they are always kept on time, even when the time is 1,000 years wide. And in the same year that the first man is buried, the heavenly tablets come to collect on the first murderer. Cain, the book says, was killed after him in that same year. And here is how. His house fell upon him, and he died in the midst of his house, and he was killed by its stones. For with a stone he had killed Abel, and by a stone was he killed in righteous judgment. There it is. The law switched on all those centuries ago, at the edge of the field, finally closes its hand. The walls Cain built to defy his exile are the walls that crush him. The stone he lifted against his brother becomes the stone that comes down on his own skull. He built a city to escape a wandering sentence, and the city killed him. You could not write a more perfect ending if you tried, and that is exactly the point the book is making. Somebody did write it, the author insists. It was written on the tablets before Cain ever swung. He was living inside his own verdict the whole time, and never knew. And still the clock does not stop, not for grief and not for judgment. It keeps turning. Enoch, taken into the garden, leaves behind a son, Methuselah, who will become the oldest man the world will ever hold. And Methuselah begets Lamech, and Lamech, in his turn, stands holding a newborn and gives him a name that is really a prayer. He calls the boy Noah, And he says over him, "This one will comfort us for our work, and for the toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord has cursed." Comfort. The whole exhausted line, all those centuries of tearing bread out of cursed dirt and the sweat of the face, gathers itself into one hope and hangs it around the neck of a baby. They do not know yet how right they are. They do not know that the comfort this child brings will arrive wrapped in the drowning of everything they have ever seen. The rest that Noah's name promises is real. It is just that the world has to end to earn it. And now the world tips toward the water, because the sons of the Watchers are on the earth now, and they are giants, and Jubilees is blunt about what they do. Lawlessness increased on the earth, it says, and all flesh corrupted its way, and they began to devour one another. Read that last phrase again, because the book is not being poetic. It means it. The giants ate. When their father's forbidden teaching had stripped the world bare, when there was no harvest large enough to fill things that size, they turned on the animals, and then on each other, and then on the ordinary sons of men who were never built to fight them. And the corruption was not only in the giants. All flesh, the book says, corrupted its way, men and cattle and beasts and birds, every living thing knocked out of the order it was made for, as though the poison of the descent had gotten into the groundwater of creation itself. This is what a world looks like when the teachers have become the infection. Not fire from the sky, just appetite with no bottom, everywhere at once, and every imagination of the thoughts of men only evil, continually. The teachers who came down in the days of the descent have filled the world with hunger that walks upright. And God looks at the earth and sees that it is corrupt, that every imagination of the thoughts of men is only evil, continually. And he speaks the sentence that hangs over everything that is about to happen. "My spirit," he says, "shall not always abide on man, for they also are flesh, and their days shall be 120 years. Pause on that number, because people have argued over it for as long as there have been people to argue. 120 years. Some have read it as a new ceiling laid over human life, the moment the long ages of the patriarchs, the 900s, begin their slow collapse toward the span you and I actually get. Others read it as a countdown, 120 years of grace before the waterfalls, one last window held open while the ark takes shape. The book does not stop to settle the quarrel, and I will not pretend for you that it does, but set the number beside everything else this author loves, and you can feel the pull of it. A fixed span announced in advance and then allowed to run out. Even the sentence of doom in this book arrives with a clock bolted to the side of it, and then heaven does something it has not done before. It turns on its own. The angels who came down are seized and bound and buried in the depths of the earth, chained in the dark to wait for judgment. But their sons, the giants, get a crueler sentence, and the book chooses its words with terrible care. God sends a sword into their midst, not a flood, not yet, a sword. And the command is that each giant should slay his neighbor, that they should turn on each other, and Jubilees says their own fathers were made to watch. The bound angels, chained in the earth, are forced to witness their children hacking one another to pieces across the whole face of the world until every last giant has fallen. An entire generation of monsters killing itself to extinction, while the things that made them look on and can do nothing. Let that sentence stand for a moment, because the book means every word of it. The Watchers are not simply punished. They are chained in the dark and made to watch. Their crime was to come down and braid heaven into earth where the two were never meant to be joined, and their sentence is to be pinned in the earth with their eyes open, while the earth and heaven things they fathered tear one another apart. Every scream, every fall, every one of their enormous sons going down under a brother's blade, and the fathers cannot look away, and cannot die, and cannot lift a hand to stop it. It is in a way the cruelest sentence in the whole book, crueler even than the flood that is coming, because the flood at least is quick. This is slow. This is a punishment measured out in the long, patient currency of watching, and it goes on until the silence is total and the last giant lies still. But here is the question the book is about to answer, the question that is the real reason any of this matters to you, sitting where you are right now. When a giant dies, when that enormous stitched-together thing, half of heaven and half of earth, finally falls in the dust with its brother's blade in it, where does it go? Its body rots. but its father was an angel. Its spirit does not belong to the ground, so what happens to the spirit of a dead giant, a thing that was never supposed to exist, with nowhere in heaven and nowhere in earth to go? The water is coming to bury the bodies. It is going to do nothing at all about the spirits, and the day it comes is a day you have already been told to remember. One man was found clean. His heart was righteous in all his ways, the book says, and he had not departed from anything that was ordained for him. And so, when the Lord decided to wash the world, Noah was the exception written into the sentence. He was told to build the ark, and he built it in the 27th Jubilee of years, exactly as he was commanded. And then the book begins to do the thing it does better than any other scripture on earth. It starts naming the days, but before the days, consider the man, because the book is careful to tell you exactly why Noah, of all the people alive on the earth, was pulled out of the water. It was not luck, and it was not favoritism. His heart was righteous in all his ways, it says, and he had not departed from anything that was ordained for him. In a generation where every imagination of every thought was only evil continually, one man had kept the order. One man had stayed inside the lines the heavenly tablets had drawn. And so, when the sentence came down on all flesh, it came down around him, the way a flood divides around a standing stone. And the book adds a detail that should land on you with real weight. His righteousness, it says, was accepted on behalf of his sons. The 3 young men who would go on to refill the whole earth were carried through the end of the world on the strength of their father's straight spine. An entire future rode out the drowning of everything on the character of a single man. That is how narrow the gate was, not a nation, not even a remnant. One household, kept afloat by one clean heart. Because Jubilees does not say the flood came in the springtime. It gives you the date. Noah went into the ark, it says, and the Lord closed it from without on the 17th evening, the 17th. And the floodgates of heaven opened, 7 of them. In the mouths of the great deep, 7 of them. And the water came down 40 days and 40 nights, and came up from below at the same time, until the whole world was one sea, and the ark lifted off the drowned mountains and floated on the face of a planet that no longer had a surface. The book does not spare you the scale of it. 15 cubits, it says, the waters rose above the highest mountains, so that there was no peak left anywhere to climb to, no last island, no strip of high ground where anything could hold on. And the water stood over the face of the earth for 5 months, 150 days, a season and a half of nothing but gray sky over gray sea, and the one small wooden box holding the last breathing things in the world. Everything the book had spent all those careful chapters naming, the cities, the whole line of Cain, the last of the giants, and the ordinary men and women whose only crime was being born into the wrong generation. All of it went under the same water together, and none of it came back up. When Jubilees says all flesh, it means all flesh. The mercy in this entire story is the size of one boat. And they waited, not 40 days. A year, the book counts it out month by patient month. The water standing and then slowly sinking, the tops of the mountains breaking the surface one by one like the backs of drowned animals. The ark grinding at last onto the peak of a mountain it calls Lubar, one of the mountains of Ararat. And still they wait, sealed in the dark with the sound and the smell of every animal left alive, until the ground below is not merely uncovered, but dry enough to hold the weight of a foot. A whole year in a wooden box on a dead planet. Whatever you had pictured survival looking like, it was longer than that, and quieter, and it smelled worse, and it asked far more of them than the storm ever did. The flood is the loud part of the story. The waiting is the hard part. Anyone can be brave for 40 days. It is the year afterward, the long gray patience with nothing to fight, that actually saves the world. Now stop, because I told you at the very beginning to mark a date, and here it is closing its hand. The world went wrong, Jubilees said, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day, when the serpent came to the woman at the end of the 7 years of Eden. And now the world is being unmade, and the door of the ark is sealed on the 17th. And when the waters finally go down and the earth is dry again, the book tells you the day that happens too, and it is the 17th day of the 2nd month, the exact anniversary. The world broke on that date, and the world was scoured and handed back on that date, as if heaven were not improvising at all, as if it were keeping an appointment set in the first week of creation. This is the checksum beginning to show itself. The author has been counting this whole time so that you would arrive here and feel the click. The fall and the flood are not two disasters. They are the same date, ringing twice. And if you followed the last chapter of the story before this one, you have already felt this date once. Because the 17th day of the second month is the same hinge the whole countdown of the world before the flood swung upon. The exact fold in the calendar where the numbers you were handed all came due at once. The author is not repeating himself by accident. He is showing you his hand. A world that runs on a clock does not have coincidences. It has anniversaries. And the reason a careful reader gets chills at the 17th day of the second month is that the book has trained you, patiently, over thousands of years of story, to understand that when this date comes around, something ends. It is the day the ledger turns the page. And when the door opens, the book gives you a covenant, and it gives you a sky. Noah comes out onto the top of a mountain the book calls Lubar, one of the mountains of Ararat. And he builds an altar and he burns an offering, and the Lord smells the goodly savor and swears that he will never again bring a flood to destroy the earth. Seed time and harvest, the promise goes, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, shall never cease nor change their order. And he sets his bow in the cloud, the rainbow, as the sign of it. Notice what that image really is, because it is easy to miss under all the color. It is a weapon hung up in the sky unstrung. The war bow of heaven, laid down and turned toward no one, pointed away from the earth for good. The most violent thing in the story becomes its gentlest promise. But watch what the book does even here, in the middle of mercy. It ties the covenant to the calendar. This festival, it says, was kept in heaven from the day of creation, and Noah is commanded to reckon the year at 364 days, and warned that his children will one day lose the count, will follow the moon, will drift 10 days too soon, and will end up keeping the holy days on unclean afternoons. Even as God is promising never to drown the world again, the book cannot stop worrying about the clock, because to this author, losing the calendar is its own kind of flood, a slow one, a quiet one that drowns you without ever getting you wet. And the covenant has terms, the way everything in this book has terms. Noah and his sons are handed the whole living world to eat, every beast and bird and fish that moves, a permission Adam in his garden never had, but with a single line drawn hard through the middle of the gift. The blood, they are told, you shall not eat, for the life of all flesh is in its blood. Life belongs to the one who gave it, and to swallow the blood is to take something that was never yours. And Noah swears to it, he and his sons together, the first oath, sworn by human beings on the far side of the water. And the book ties it, of course it does, to a day on the calendar, to the feast that heaven itself had been keeping since the first week of the world. Even the rescue is dated. Even the mercy has a fixed place in the year and a price written next to it. And now at last we come to the thing I opened with, the thing that is still walking around, because the water buried the giants' bodies, and it did absolutely nothing about their spirits. Here is what Jubilees says happens after the world is clean. Noah's sons begin to have sons of their own. The earth begins to fill again, and something starts hunting the children. Unclean spirits, the book says, begin to lead the grandchildren of Noah astray, and to blind them, and to make them sick, and to destroy them. And these spirits are not new demons made for the occasion. They are the survivors. They are the disembodied spirits of the giants who died by the sword before the flood, the ghosts of that murdered generation, homeless, bodiless, belonging to neither heaven nor earth, and full of nothing but the appetite they had in life. The flood took their flesh. It could not touch what their angel fathers had put into them, and so they came back, not as giants now, but as something worse, as invisible hunger looking for a way into a child. And Jubilees is precise about what these spirits are, and the precision is exactly what makes them so much worse than any monster you could see coming. They are not fallen angels, because the fallen angels are already chained in the deep. They are not the ghosts of ordinary men, because ordinary men go down to their rest. They are the spirits of a thing that was never supposed to exist at all, half of heaven and half of earth stitched into one body. And when the earth half rotted away in the flood, the heaven half was left with nowhere to go. No grave in the ground would hold it. No door in the sky would open for it. So it stayed in the only country left to it, the thin margin of air just above the soil. the narrow band where living things move and breathe. That is where the book puts them. Not in some far-off pit of fire, here, at elbow height, in the room, close enough to whisper, and it worked. The spirits blinded Noah's grandchildren, the book says, and led them astray, and made them sick, and began to destroy them. Picture the old man's position for a moment. He has survived the end of the world. He is standing on dry ground at last, on the far side of the water, with his sons and their sons rebuilding around him, believing with everything in him that the worst is finally, permanently behind them. And then the children start to fall, not to any sickness he can see coming, not to any enemy he can raise a hand against, but to a thing with no body and no face, the leftover appetite of a drowned generation, reaching into the one place the flood was supposed to have made safe. This is the cruelty the book refuses to look away from. The water was not enough. The thing in the dark had learned how to do without a body, and it was patient, and it had come back for the grandchildren. And Noah, an old man who has already watched one world die, watches it start to happen again to his own grandchildren, and he does the only thing left to him. He prays. Let thy grace be lifted up upon my sons, he begs, and let not the wicked spirits rule over them, lest they destroy them from the earth. He asks God to lock every last one of them away. It is the prayer of a man who has already lost one world and cannot stand to watch the pieces of it crawl back for the next. Bind them all, he begs. Every one, leave not a single one of them loose upon the earth. Give my sons and my sons' sons a clean ground to inherit, a ground the horror cannot follow them onto. It is the most reasonable request in the entire book. It is more or less exactly what you would ask, standing where he stood. And it is exactly what does not happen. And it is at that exact moment, with the prayer still in the air, that the book introduces the figure who has been waiting in the wings of this entire story. His name is Mastema, and the name means hostility or animosity, and he is the chief of the spirits, the prince of them, the accuser. He is the Book of Jubilees' answer to a question Genesis never openly asks, which is who exactly is running the opposition, and it is worth knowing his name before you watch him work, because Mastema does not leave the story after this scene. He is the shadow hand behind the hard things all the way down. Later in the book, it will be Mastema who moves against Abraham, Mastema who stands behind the terrors of Egypt, Mastema who does the grim work that the older stories leave with no name attached to it. He is the accuser handed a jurisdiction, the adversary written into the very machinery of the world like a kind of dark civil servant with a department and a mandate. And here, standing over the freshly drowned earth, he steps forward for the first time to argue his budget, and Mastema steps forward, and he does not rage, and he does not attack. He makes a legal argument. He petitions the Creator directly, and this is the hinge the whole world still turns on. So listen to it in his own voice. Lord Creator, he says, let some of them remain before me, and let them hearken to my voice, and do all that I shall say unto them. For if none of them is left to me, I shall not be able to execute the power of my will on the sons of men. For these, he says of humanity, are meant for corrupting and leading astray before my judgment, for great is the wickedness of the sons of men. Read that again, because it is one of the most unsettling paragraphs in all of the lost books. The adversary is not asking permission to break the rules, he is asking permission to enforce them. He argues that mankind is wicked enough to deserve tempting, and that he needs a workforce of spirits to do the tempting, and that without them he cannot carry out what he calls the power of his will. It is the accuser applying for a license. And the terrible thing, the thing that will sit in your chest, is that God grants it, in part. The Lord commands that 9 parts of the spirits be bound and dragged down into the place of condemnation, into the dark forever, and one part in 10. Let the 10th part remain, the book says, before Mastema, subject to him, on the earth. That is the bargain I told you about at the very start. That is the contract signed over the corpse of a drowned world. Not by scheming in the dark, but out loud, in a courtroom, between the Creator and the accuser, with a grieving old man standing to one side. 9 of every 10 of those giant ghosts chained below. 1 of every 10 left loose under command, licensed to test and to tempt and to afflict the sons of men until the day of the last judgment. And if you have ever felt something press on you in the dark that you could not name, if you have ever felt a pull toward the exact worst thing at the exact worst moment, this book has an answer for you, and the answer is a number, 1 in 10, a tithe of the drowned, left behind on purpose. And honesty requires a word here, because this is one of those places where the lost books lean on one another and hold each other up. The idea that the demons are the ghosts of the dead giants is not something Jubilees invented on its own. The Book of Enoch spells it out too, in almost the same breath, the two books agreeing across the centuries like two witnesses describing the same crime from different rooms. Where they agree like that, the tradition behind them is old and deep, and you should take it seriously even if you take nothing else in the story literally. What Jubilees adds, what makes it the sharper and stranger of the two, is the courtroom, the petition, the bargain spoken out loud. Enoch tells you the spirits exist. Jubilees tells you they are under contract. But the story does not end on the bargain, and this is the mercy that makes Jubilees Jubilees. Because Noah is standing right there, and he has just been told that 1/10 of the horror is staying, and God does not leave him defenseless. The Lord commands the angels, the loyal ones, to come down to Noah and to teach him, and they teach him medicine. They explain to him, the book says, all the medicines of the diseases, and how he might heal with the herbs of the earth. Every remedy, every cure, every root and leaf that could push back against what the spirits do to the body, the angels lay out for him, one by one, and Noah writes it down. He takes the first book of medicine in the history of the world, dictated by angels as an antidote to a demonic bargain, and he seals it, and he gives it to his son Shem, the eldest, to carry forward. So that the 10th part could hunt, yes, but the sons of men would not be unarmed. For every spirit left loose to make you sick, there would be a green and growing thing somewhere on the earth that could make you well, and the map of which was written down by a survivor and handed to his son. Think about what that book of Noah actually is, in the logic of this story. It is the first medicine, and it exists only because the first demons were left loose. The cure and the curse are the same age. The angels did not simply comfort Noah with words, they armed him, and they made sure the weapon could be inherited, written down and sealed, and passed from hand to hand, down the generations, from Shem to his sons and onward. And that is the quiet, staggering suggestion the book leaves you holding, that somewhere behind every remedy that has ever worked, behind every herb that ever brought a fever down, is that first scroll, dictated by loyal angels on the raw new earth, as the direct answer to a bargain struck in a courtroom of spirits. The pharmacy and the exorcism, in this telling, were born on the same afternoon, from the same event, as two halves of one mercy. And you are entitled to ask the hard question, the one that sits under the whole bargain like a splinter. Why leave any of them at all? If God could bind 9 parts, he could bind 10. Why grant the accuser his 10th? Why license a single one of those things to keep hunting the children of men? The book does not answer it cleanly, and I am not going to hand you an answer it does not give. But you can feel the shape of the reasoning in Mastema's own words, because his argument is not that men are innocent and deserve tormenting. His argument is that men are wicked, and that the wickedness must be tested, sorted, judged, and that he cannot do that work with no instruments in his hand. The 10th part, in this cold logic, is not there to destroy the righteous. It is there to try everyone, to press on every soul, and see what it is truly made of, so that the judgment already written on the heavenly tablets will be a judgment that fits. It is a terrible mercy, if it is a mercy at all, but it is of a piece with everything else in the book. Even the darkness is on a leash. Even the tempter has a license, a limit, and a purpose he did not choose. Sit with the whole shape of that for a moment, because it is the shape of the entire book. A world put under a clock, a calendar written into the sun, appointments kept to the exact day across 1,000 years, a murder answered by its own weapon, a 10th of the darkness licensed by law, and a book of cures handed down to meet it. Nothing in this account is random. Everything is counted, weighed, dated, and filed. That is the vision the angel of the presence dictates to Moses in the cloud on Sinai. Not a gentle story, a ledger, a universe of terrifying, exact bookkeeping, where even the demons operate under a signed agreement, and even the mercy comes with a recipe. And now you can see why the book counts so hard, why it will not let a single patriarch pass without pinning him to a week of a year of a jubilee. Because if you know the exact length of a year, and you have the exact age of every man in the line, then you can lay the whole history of the world end to end and read it as one continuous number, one clock running from the first morning of Eden. And when you do, the same date keeps surfacing, the second month and the 17th day, the day the serpent came and the day the door was shut, the hinge the author has been quietly turning under everything. That is the checksum. That is the thing the book has been building toward from its first line. History, it insists, is not a river. It is a mechanism, and the mechanism keeps perfect time, and the count does not stop at the flood. The book runs its clock all the way down, jubilee after jubilee of 49 years, through Noah and the scattering of the nations and the long road to Abraham, straight to the mountain where Moses is kneeling in the cloud receiving the whole of it. So that when you finally close the book, you are meant to be able to lay one finger on the exact fold of time where you yourself are standing and know, to the year, how far you are from the first morning of Eden. That is the promise hidden underneath all the horror. Not that the world is safe, because the book has just spent its whole length telling you it is not, but that the world is counted, that nothing in it has been lost track of, not one death, not one birth, not one drowned generation, that the same hand which hung the unstrung bow in the cloud is still holding the ledger and has not skipped a single line, and knows exactly what page we are on. Which is exactly why this could not be the only book they left out. Because a story like this, an oath sworn on a mountain, angels coming down to teach and staying to ruin, giants and their hungry ghosts, does not begin in Jubilees, and it does not end there. You have already seen the beginning of it on the summit of Mount Hermon, where 200 of them stood in a circle and swore an oath none of them could take back, and learned exactly where the demons in this story came from, and why one man's name became the address they mail the world's sin to. If you have not walked that mountain yet, it is waiting for you on this channel, and it is the other half of tonight, and the next door in the hallway is already open a crack. Because there is another book, older sounding and stranger still, that tells these same centuries with details Jubilees leaves in the dark. It has a name for the weapon Cain used. It records the war of the giants as an eyewitness. It is called the Book of Jasher, and it is where we are going next. The lost books are not a pile of scraps. They are one long corridor, and every door opens into the next. Walk it with me. Subscribe, and I will keep opening them, one at a time, until we reach the end of the hall. Because if the men who counted the years were right about even one thing, it is this: nothing is ever really lost. It is only waiting for someone to count carefully enough to find it again.